Welcome back to this series for the AGON Institute of Sports Ministry and in conjunction with Barclay College. This is on the Theology of Competition and Sport, and we are winding down on a third of 3 segments here, talking about the integration of faith and sport. We've looked at a humanistically based ancient Greek world. We've looked at a very hedonistic view of the ancient Roman world. And now we're going to take a look at a more religious view, and that is of how did the Jews look at sport. And you have now a set of PowerPoints for those of you that are taking this for your class credit that you need to take all the notes, add your perspectives. So if you look at your first slide, the Jewish involvement in sport. The Hellenistic Games were introduced by the Romans to break the Jewish religious strength. And Herod built many very, very impressive athletic facilities. We know that Herod built a great temple. We know that he built a great palace or two. One of the most amazing builders of the era, in fact, of all time. But why was he trying to do games if he was really Jewish? Because the Jews were not inclined at all to be involved in athletics. Well, he did it to try to break some of that Jewish stronghold, if you will, to get them away from their strong faith and more into the secular or Roman culture. And right away we begin to see a practical application that much of our movement away from Christianity is a result of sport. There was a time in which there was no sport played on the Lord's Day. And then it started to move into the professional ranks, and then into the college ranks. It's only really been about a decade and a half or so that the collegiate athletes started to play their games on a Lord's Day. And now, closely following on that, high school games are now played, and now any games are played on Sunday. And in fact, some of our own churches and some of our own para-ministries have gone this direction out of a good-hearted, a well-motivated understanding that we've got to go reach people that are playing sport on Sunday. But in order to totally do this justice, you're going to have to pay attention to when we talk about the Lord's Day and Sabbath Day and how it impacts our view of competition in sport. But I think you all can agree with me at this point that the pragmatics of it is that there are far more people playing and watching sport on a Lord's Day than are actually in church. That didn't used to be the case. And so the method that Herod and the Romans used millennia ago is still in play today. Antiochus Epiphanes really started pushing the games towards the Jews as early as 175 BC. So much so that it was recorded that even the Jewish priests began to neglect their duties of sacrificing, etc. Of course, then it was a Sabbath day on a Saturday. Hastening to the arena, to the great dismay of many faithful Jews. And again, Herod built amphitheaters, hippodromes. Hippodromes were the places for the horses. A hippopotamus is a water horse, and so hippo means horse, and the dramos meaning the track. So that these tracks, he built these. And he held great sports festivals every 4 years in honor of Augustus. Okay. Now, I'm going to have you look at the second slide, and you're going to see 3 different lists: the Greek, the Roman, and the Jewish. And on the far left, you're going to see that there are the various concepts that we are going to look at. And we're going to compare these 3. Let's just look at these. What was the civic and religious goal of the athletes, of the athletics? For the Greek, it was freedom, that we are free to exercise our faith and then compete in the image of that God. But for the Greek overall, the most important thing in their culture was freedom. For the Roman, it was right, that you have a right. And even Paul in his letters and his appeal said, I have a right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar. For the Jew, it wasn't freedom, it wasn't right, it was righteousness. How can I be the most faithful person I can be? The second concept, what was the personal concern? For the Greek, it was beauty. This is why they competed in the nude. This is why they did so much to really train their body. The focus was on the human body. The personal concern for the Roman was power and the focus on the government. Not the person, not the body, but I got a right and I got a government and I'm going to be powerful. Well, what was the personal concern about athletics for the Jew? It was disgusting. It was disgraceful to compete in the nude, to do any of this. It just didn't lead to righteousness. And so they really disdained everything to do with the games. What was the greatest virtue? For the Greek, it was wisdom, focus on the mind. And they believed that these bodily exercises help cleanse the mind and help give them to a new understanding, or kind of what some of our modern day athletes understand is that when they run, at some point they experience a euphoria that helps clear the mind. For the Roman, the highest virtue was pleasure. Plain and simple. Hedonism. I'm going to focus on what feels good to me. What do I enjoy? For the Jew, it was obedience. And the focus was not on the mind, as with the Greek, not on the self, as the Roman, but on God. The rewards. For the Greek, it was internal. That's why they got these crowns that were made out of vegetation. They didn't last. It was internal. The Romans did get things that lasted. It was on the external rewards and fame and fortune. And then for the Jew, of course, it was eternal. Who were the games for? For the Greeks, the athletes out on the athletic arena. They were the ones that these were for. In fact, the stands and the fans were very, very sparse. We have one recording in the annals of the ancient Greco games that a slave owner actually was so angry with one of his slaves that his punishment was to go and attend the Olympic Games. Because the Olympic Games were so miserable, the heat, the sweltering heat, they were swarms of bugs and very, very poor accommodations and poor food. So the games were for the athletes, not for the fans, not for anybody else. But for the Roman, they were for the fans. Thousands upon thousands. The estimates would range up to 500,000. At least 350,000 people were at the Circus Maximus. And these were the games that people would come and they would watch these gladiatorial battles and all the decadence. But for the Jew said nobody. They're not for anyone. No one should participate in them. The concept of the athlete in the Greco world held in the highest esteem. for the Roman, for the fans' enjoyment. The athlete in the Jewish tradition was viewed as frivolous. So the Jews primarily thought the whole athletic realm to be at best frivolous, but more so decadent. Because it promoted self-glorification, it was opposed to glorifying God. It promoted statues, make no graven image, of victors and gods. It uncovered the body, so the Jews had huge problems with the games. And now it's kind of a segue, helping you understand where we're going. Into this, one can understand then the situation of the Apostle Paul. A Roman citizen, and yet raised as a Jew, but yet raised in a Greek culture. He could clearly comprehend the problems of the Roman approach, the obliteration of life, the deification of athletes and emperors, sacrificings of Christians in the arena. It's very likely that Paul had to fight wild beasts in Ephesus. And yet Roman citizens didn't have to do this. And so did he actually have to fight the wild beast? Well, compare 1 Corinthians 15:32, and also compare Luke 16:10 and Hebrews 12:1, 16 and 1. But my point here is that Paul understood what those martyrs were, who they were. And he says in Corinthians that they are a spectacle. The word there is a theatron, where we get theater from, that people go to watch this drama. And he says that these athletes, what was happening was a spectacle, a theater presentation. And so he knew all this. He knew also about the indulgences of the Greek in terms of nakedness and hero worship. And yet, he had a first-hand knowledge of how athletics in and of themselves were not necessarily negative. He was trained in the gymnasium of Tarsus, along with some other Greek boys. And so we can begin to see how Paul is uniquely positioned in the New Testament. Greek training in the stadium, the academy, the all that went on there. Saw how the Romans had perverted it. Got all of this righteousness from his Jewish tradition. And now he's trying to synthesize what we now know as a theology of competition and sport. That's where we're moving. We're going to start to move in some of these directions in this course. Again, make sure you get all of your notes at exam quality if you're taking this course for credit. Thanks for joining me in these last 3 lectures about the integration of faith and sport from 3 different perspectives. I'm Dr. Greg Linville. I look forward to being with you again in the near future in this Theology of Competition and Sport course.